The galaxy had grown used to fear. For centuries, countless civilizations flourished in scattered constellations, building their alliances, trading their goods, and telling themselves that peace was possible. Yet beneath every treaty and council meeting, there lingered the shadow of a power too vast to challenge. The Zark Dominion did not rule through laws or diplomacy. They ruled through terror. Their fleets descended on systems without warning, shattering orbital defenses in minutes, silencing resistance before it could form. Entire populations were enslaved, their worlds stripped bare of resources, their histories erased as if they had never existed. To resist was to invite annihilation, and so most bent their knees before the inevitable. What made the Dominion so dangerous was not merely its technology, but its philosophy. Where others saw war as a tool, the Zark treated it as identity. Their starships were predatory things, sleek black vessels bristling with energy lances that tore apart armor as though it were cloth. Their soldiers were bred for obedience and cruelty, viewing conquest not as duty but as instinct. They delighted in domination. They took pleasure in watching fear spread faster than their armies. A single broadcast of a burning colony world could force 10 others into submission without a shot being fired. The galaxy's greatest powers had tried to stand against them once. Coalitions had formed, proud fleets assembled under banners of resistance. But unity fractured in the face of relentless destruction. The Dominion targeted leaders, shattered supply lines, and sowed distrust until former allies turned on each other. One by one, the resistors were crushed. Those who survived remembered the lesson well: do not provoke the Zark, and perhaps you will be allowed to endure in chains. That was the unspoken law of the stars. For ordinary species, life became a constant balance between compliance and despair. Agricultural worlds were plundered season after season, their people reduced to workers under armed oversight. Industrial centers were forced to churn out weapons for their own oppressors, factories overseen by Dominion enforcers who answered mercy with lashes. Even advanced civilizations that once considered themselves untouchable lived in dread. It was said in the trade routes that the Zark never left a system unchanged. Where they passed, hope became a memory. The terror was not only in what they destroyed but in how completely they convinced the galaxy that resistance was pointless. They had mastered the art of inevitability. No fortress was too strong, no rebellion too defiant, no alliance too vast. Their victories were not merely military, they were psychological. When a Dominion fleet appeared in orbit, surrender often preceded the first bombardment. The galaxy's collective spirit had been broken long before its fleets had been scattered. Whispers still spread in hidden corners, among smugglers and fugitives, of worlds where resistance had been attempted and where vengeance had been swift. Stories of glass planets, their surfaces melted into lifeless wastelands, ensured that even the boldest thought twice before speaking of defiance aloud. In the eyes of most, the Zark Dominion was not a government, or even an empire. It was inevitability given form. And so the galaxy adapted to survival under the lash. Entire generations grew up never knowing freedom, only the cold certainty that their futures belonged to their masters. Diplomats learned to offer tribute before it was demanded. Traders memorized the routes patrolled by Dominion warships and prayed their cargo would not be deemed valuable enough to seize. Even the proudest warriors of distant empires taught their children to avoid eye contact with a Zark officer, for pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. It was in this climate of universal fear that humanity was born to the stars. A young species, late to the great currents of galactic history, their arrival went unnoticed. Few gave Earth or its colonies a second thought. They were too small, too isolated, and too technologically unsophisticated to warrant attention. Compared to the ancient powers with millennia of interstellar experience, humanity was a drop in an endless ocean. That irrelevance may have saved them for a time. The Zark Dominion barely acknowledged their existence, seeing no value in wasting fleets on such a minor civilization. But the Dominion's hunger was endless, and as the centuries turned, its shadow spread outward. To the galaxy, humanity's fate was already sealed. Another weak species, another handful of colonies to be consumed, another line in the ledger of inevitable conquest. The question was not if they would be broken but when. The Dominion had reason to be confident. Every species before had bowed or bled until nothing was left. There was no precedent for a different outcome. The galaxy had accepted this truth as immutable. Yet hidden beneath that assumption lay an error so profound it would alter the course of history. The Zark believed that all prey behaved the same, that terror was universal, that inevitability was absolute. What they had never faced, what they had never even considered, was a species that did not know how to surrender. Humanity's entrance into the interstellar stage was unremarkable by galactic standards. Their first colonies were small, scattered across nearby systems, struggling with the challenges of distance, isolation, and the hostility of alien environments. Their ships lacked elegance compared to the sleek vessels of older civilizations, their engines slower, their weapons crude. To those who measured worth by technological sophistication, humans were an afterthought. They were catalogued in trade registries, granted limited access to commercial routes, and largely dismissed as another primitive species fumbling into the void. The galaxy had seen this pattern countless times. A young race, proud of its new discoveries, eager to stake claims among the stars, inevitably learned its place. Most adapted to the established order, offering tribute to stronger powers in exchange for protection. Humanity seemed destined to follow the same trajectory, another minor civilization folded into the background noise of galactic affairs. But appearances concealed truths that no outsider cared to notice. For one, human history had not been forged in stability. Their past was a catalogue of conflict, disaster, and relentless survival. They had endured ice ages, plagues, famines, and wars that nearly tore their world apart. Unlike many species who had evolved in relative harmony, humans carried a heritage of struggle encoded in their very identity. They did not advance because conditions were easy but because they were hard. Every leap forward had been purchased at the edge of desperation. Where other civilizations measured progress in centuries of patient refinement, humans often advanced in bursts, driven by necessity. It was a habit born from always having to fight for existence. This cultural foundation shaped their approach to space. Their ships might not have been graceful, but they were built to endure punishment. Human engineers obsessed over redundancy, ensuring that systems could fail and still keep a vessel functional. Where aliens prized efficiency, humanity prioritized resilience. A warship's hull was layered with armor that seemed excessive to outsiders, bristling with point defense turrets and backup generators. Every corner of their designs reflected a philosophy: expect things to go wrong, and prepare to keep fighting when they do. Weapons followed the same logic. While many advanced species relied on energy lances, plasma beams, or precision-guided strike craft, humanity clung to what others dismissed as primitive: kinetic artillery. Massive railguns hurled tungsten slugs at near-relativistic speeds, weapons so simple in principle that few civilizations bothered with them. But what the galaxy overlooked was the devastating physics of such projectiles. Where energy shields could disperse beams, a solid object with enough momentum tore through defenses with brutal finality. Coupled with nuclear warheads and missiles optimized for saturation strikes, human fleets wielded an arsenal built not on elegance but on certainty of destruction. If outsiders had looked more closely, they might have seen the danger in this approach. Instead, they laughed at it, labeling humans as unimaginative and crude. But within human fleets, a different reputation was forming. Among their colonies, whispers spread of a ship that embodied this doctrine more than any other, a vessel not designed to intimidate with beauty but to terrify with persistence. It was called the Vanguard. The Vanguard was not humanity's largest ship, nor its most advanced, but it was the most uncompromising. Its hull was reinforced with layers of armor so thick it could withstand barrages that would cripple ships twice its size. Its reactors were overbuilt, capable of overcharging weapons in moments of desperation. Its crew quarters were cramped and harsh, because comfort had been sacrificed for survival systems. Every circuit, every panel, every weapon mount had been designed with the expectation that it might fail under fire and would need to be repaired on the spot. It was not a vessel crafted for ceremony. It was built to outlast anything the void could throw at it. Among its crew, a culture of defiance thrived. They were not soldiers in the polished sense of older navies but survivors, drawn from colonies where life was harsh and resourcefulness was second nature. They trained not just to follow orders but to improvise, to adapt to sudden failures, to fight with whatever tools were left in their hands. Where other species saw war as strategy and calculation, humans treated it as endurance. Victory was not about elegance. It was about lasting longer than the enemy could. This mindset, invisible to the wider galaxy, made them dangerous in ways few understood. It was why when the Dominion finally turned its gaze toward human space, the outcome was not as predictable as history suggested. The Zark believed they faced another weak and isolated people, a species too small to matter, one that would kneel or be broken. What awaited them instead was a civilization accustomed to standing at the edge of extinction and refusing to fall. And at the heart of that defiance stood a single warship, ready to. The Dominion's fleets had burned countless worlds into silence, and the attack on a human colony was expected to be no different. Scouts reported a settlement rich in resources but lightly defended, another prize for the taking. Confidence was absolute. No record in their history suggested this would be more than routine extermination. They arrived in formation, dark warships blotting out the stars, their commanders already imagining the spoils. What they found instead was resistance. Orbiting the colony was a single Terran vessel, the Vanguard. To the Dominion it looked unremarkable, a heavy cruiser of crude design, lacking the sleek symmetry of their own ships. They noted the oversized armor plating, the ungainly profile, and concluded it was little more than an overbuilt transport repurposed as a warship. Their communications demanded surrender, delivered with the same arrogance they had used to conquer 100 systems. What they received in response was silence, followed by the thunder of weapons fire. The battle began abruptly, without hesitation. Dominion ships surged forward, their energy lances cutting through space in brilliant arcs. Against any other enemy, the exchange would have been over within minutes. But the Vanguard did not break. Its hull absorbed hits that should have crippled it, plating buckling and blackening but holding long enough for its guns to answer. Rail cannons roared, launching slugs that tore through the void at impossible speed. Shields that had withstood energy fire for centuries collapsed under the raw impact of physics. Dominion vessels staggered as holes were punched clean through their armored hearts. The Dominion had always relied on intimidation to weaken resistance before the fight truly began. What unsettled them now was not only the firepower of the Vanguard but the manner in which it fought. Every time the ship was struck, it countered with renewed ferocity, as if pain only sharpened its resolve. Its crew patched ruptured systems on the fly, rerouting power through jury-rigged connections, forcing the vessel to keep moving when logic said it should already be adrift. For the first time in living memory, Dominion officers watched a target refuse to collapse under the weight of fear. The tactics themselves defied convention. Where Dominion fleets moved with choreographed precision, the Vanguard fought with unpredictability. It veered suddenly into plasma storms that should have crippled its own sensors, using interference to mask missile launches. It feigned reactor failure to lure enemy ships close, then unleashed broadsides of kinetic fire at point-blank range. Every maneuver spoke of a crew willing to risk annihilation for the chance of taking their enemies with them. To the Dominion, this was not strategy. It was madness. Yet it was working. Losses mounted quickly. One destroyer was split apart by a tungsten slug that punched through bow to stern, detonating its reactor. Another was engulfed in a spread of nuclear warheads, its shielding overwhelmed by sheer saturation. Each loss reverberated across the fleet, not merely as tactical failure but as an insult. They were the predators of the galaxy, and yet here they were bleeding before a single opponent. Their commanders pressed harder, unwilling to believe what their eyes told them, certain that victory was only moments away. But the moments stretched on. With each passing minute, the Dominion's numerical superiority became less of an advantage and more of a liability. Their formations, designed for swift intimidation, faltered against an enemy that refused to die. Ships collided in their rush to overwhelm, firing arcs crossed chaotically, and confusion began to spread. In that chaos, the Vanguard thrived. Every shot it fired carried not just destructive force but the weight of defiance, a message broadcast in steel: humanity would not kneel. When the Dominion finally withdrew, it was not out of tactical calculation but out of disbelief. They left behind wreckage drifting silently, the remains of ships that had been considered untouchable. The colony still stood, battered but alive. And at its heart, scarred and burning but unbroken, remained the Vanguard. Word of the encounter spread faster than the Dominion had anticipated. Traders whispered of a human ship that had bloodied the Empire's teeth. Refugees from conquered worlds passed the story along like a secret flame. Even in corners of the galaxy where hope had long since died, something began to stir. The Zark Dominion, for the first time in memory, had been forced to retreat. And humanity, once dismissed as irrelevant, had announced itself not with words or treaties but with fire. The defeat of a Dominion fleet at the hands of a single human warship was not supposed to happen. For the first time in living memory, their aura of inevitability had been pierced, and though the loss was small compared to the vastness of their empire, the implications were enormous. The Zark responded with fury. Retaliation was immediate, their commanders vowing to erase the stain of humiliation. They assembled larger task forces, convinced that overwhelming numbers would grind humanity into dust. Yet what they failed to understand was that every encounter only made humanity stronger. Each clash taught lessons, and every scar on their ships revealed how to adapt. The Vanguard became more than a warship, it became a crucible. Its engineers documented every failure and turned them into innovations. Hull plating was reinforced with experimental alloys forged in colonies desperate to protect themselves. New missile systems were tested mid-battle, designed to overwhelm even the most advanced defenses. The Dominion had relied for centuries on predictable opponents. Humanity was anything but predictable. Where other civilizations had crumbled under sustained assault, humans fought like cornered beasts, striking back with methods that defied convention. They used asteroid fields as ambush sites, luring Dominion ships into terrain they considered impassable. They deployed decoy signals, scattering false fleets across the void to fracture enemy pursuit. Every defeat only hardened their resolve, and every victory added to a growing legend. The name Vanguard spread across star systems as both warning and promise. To allies it was hope. To enemies, it was a threat whispered with unease. The Dominion escalated, unleashing fleets meant to drown humanity in fire. But numbers alone could not extinguish a species that had long learned to survive against overwhelming odds. Humanity's strength lay not only in technology but in willpower. Where others surrendered to preserve their worlds, humans chose sacrifice over submission. Colonists volunteered their ships as decoys, buying time for the Vanguard to strike. Crews willingly flew suicide runs to cripple enemy flagships, turning every confrontation into a test of endurance the Dominion was unprepared to face. Observers from neutral civilizations watched with fascination. For centuries they had believed resistance against the Dominion was hopeless, that rebellion would always be crushed before it could grow. But here was a young species shattering that belief with every desperate act. Rumors spread in hushed tones: if humanity could fight, perhaps others could too. The Zark had built their empire on the certainty of fear, and that certainty was beginning to fracture. The Dominion could not admit weakness, yet the more they pressed, the more cracks appeared in their own facade. Losses that should have been impossible accumulated, not enough to cripple them, but enough to shake confidence. Commanders began hesitating where once they struck without doubt. Soldiers who had mocked humanity as irrelevant now spoke of the Vanguard with unease, recalling comrades lost to what was supposed to be prey. The psychological weapon the Dominion had always relied upon, terror, was being turned back against them. Within humanity, the transformation was profound. What began as survival hardened into identity. Colonies once fearful of inevitable conquest now sent volunteers to join the fight, each person willing to bear the cost if it meant striking one more blow against the Empire. The Vanguard became a symbol greater than itself, its battered hull representing defiance against a universe that had accepted slavery as destiny. For every scar on its armor, there was a story of a world saved or an enemy destroyed. But the Dominion was not yet defeated. Their pride demanded more than skirmishes or retaliations. They resolved to crush humanity utterly, not only to reclaim their reputation but to remind the galaxy that resistance remained futile. Whispers from intelligence networks spoke of an armada being assembled, vast enough to overwhelm anything humanity could deploy. It was not merely a military maneuver, it was an act of theater, a performance designed to erase the legend of the Vanguard in a single devastating blow. The galaxy held its breath. Some expected humanity to finally buckle, as every other species had before. Others waited with hope that perhaps this time would be different. At the center of it all, scarred and stubborn as ever, the Vanguard prepared for the storm. Humanity had never asked for this war, but now that it had been forced upon them, they would carry it to the very end. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of one species, but the balance of fear across the stars. The Dominion gathered its strength as never before. From across its empire, fleets were summoned, warships drawn into a single formation meant to extinguish humanity in one crushing stroke. Hundreds of vessels assembled, their combined firepower greater than anything the stars had witnessed in living memory. This was not a campaign. It was an execution. The message was clear: Earth would burn, and with it, the defiance that had spread like wildfire through the galaxy. Humanity saw the storm coming, but retreat was never considered. They lacked the numbers to match the armada, yet that had never been the measure of their strength. Instead, they prepared to bleed for every inch of space, to resist until resistance was no longer possible, and then resist still. At the center of these preparations stood the Vanguard, patched together from battle after battle, its scars unhidden. Where other ships bore the gleam of fresh armor, the Vanguard wore its wounds like proof of survival. It was no longer just a warship, it was the heart of a civilization that refused to kneel. When the Dominion Armada arrived at Earth's threshold, the void lit with fury. Their fleets advanced in waves, energy lances cutting across the system like storm winds. Human defenses answered with everything they had, railguns firing slugs the size of buildings, missiles launched in swarms so vast they seemed to form their own constellations. Ships exploded by the dozen, fire blooming in the darkness, fragments scattering like embers. Humanity fought not for dominance but for survival, and in that desperation they found a ferocity the Dominion had never understood. The Vanguard surged into the center of the onslaught, drawing enemy fire as if it were a beacon of defiance. Every cannon thundered, every missile bay emptied, every ounce of power poured into keeping its weapons alive. Dominion destroyers fell before its barrages, cruisers shattered under the relentless assault. Yet the cost was staggering. Sections of the Vanguard were gutted by direct hits, decks vented into space, crew lost by the score. Still the ship advanced, scarred and burning, tearing at the enemy line with the same stubborn determination that defined its species. The battle raged for hours, the void choked with wreckage. Dominion commanders, once confident of swift victory, found themselves forced into desperation. The Vanguard would not yield, and every attempt to break humanity's defenses only revealed more traps, more ambushes, more willingness to pay in blood for every Dominion ship destroyed. The balance of terror, once entirely in the Empire's favor, had shifted. Now it was the Zark who felt the weight of inevitability pressing against them. At the heart of the conflict came the final gambit. With its systems failing and enemy warships converging, the Vanguard prepared one last strike. Its crew rerouted every remaining ounce of power into the railgun array, overcharging the reactors far beyond safe limits. The ship itself would not survive the maneuver, but survival was no longer the goal. Humanity's message would be delivered in fire. As the Dominion flagship advanced, a titan of black metal bristling with weapons, the Vanguard unleashed its final volley. Slugs accelerated to unimaginable speed tore through the flagship's shields, ripping its core apart in a detonation that cascaded through the armada. Chaos followed, ships collided, formations shattered, commanders panicked. The Dominion's great display of inevitability crumbled before the eyes of the galaxy. The Vanguard did not live to see the aftermath. Its reactors went critical, consuming the vessel in a brilliant eruption that seared across the battlefield. For those who witnessed it, the sight was unforgettable, one warship defying an empire to its final breath, a single act of sacrifice that turned the tide of history. In the silence that followed, the Dominion withdrew. Their armada, vast and terrible, was broken not by superior numbers but by unbreakable will. For the first time in centuries, they had failed to impose their rule. Across the galaxy, whispers of rebellion grew louder, fueled by the knowledge that the impossible had been done. The Zark Dominion was not invincible. Humanity emerged bloodied, their fleets in ruins, their colonies scarred. Yet they stood. Where others had surrendered, they endured. And in enduring, they had changed the course of the stars. No longer dismissed as insignificant, they were now recognized as something far greater, a species that refused extinction, that turned desperation into strength, and that carried defiance in their very blood. The Dominion had sought to make an example of humanity. Instead, they had forged a legend. From that day forward, every civilization knew a new truth: the galaxy's predators had met their match. For when humanity sent a single warship against an empire, the empire blinked. And the galaxy would never be the same.